Hi, my name's Steve and welcome to the Seaside Allotment channel, and I did a video yesterday showing the peppers and tomatoes that I was planting out in the polytunnel, and as lots of people helpfully pointed out that it's not great planting weather at the moment, or it's certainly not going to be next week. There's likely to be a fairly significant frost across most of the country, and the wind's up as well, and my broad beans are getting battered, and even some of the stuff that's under cover is getting battered a bit by the wind today. So just taking stock of what I'm going to do. So there's no problem in the polytunnel really, I don't think, because I'm going to be able to fleece that really easily. And although actually even last night it was down, it was pretty cold in here. It was about 2 degrees. Yeah, so it's relatively easy anyway to fleece the polytunnel. The low tunnels that I've got outside that have got peppers and courgettes and things like that in them, and French beans, I'll fleece those beds as well. What I'm just doing though is I'm taking a look at the low tunnels to make sure there's not too big a gap. Now normally I quite like a little bit of gap that comes from the tunnels kind of warping over time, because that little gap just provides some good ventilation. But when it's windy and freezing, it's not great to have a gap for those sorts of things. So I'm just fixing those things, just allowing them to be battened down a little bit better to close those gaps up. And yeah, I'm going to tie in the broad beans. So anyway, I'm going to get on with that, and then hopefully get back to some planting. So I've just tied in the broad beans with this very colourful rope, just kind of woven it through in a zigzag along there, and one rope just along the edge. So hopefully that'll keep them upright during the wind. Managed to stomp on a few of these garlic while I was doing it. So next up, these peas are getting a bit of a battering, so I'm just going to loop a bit of string around those. So then there's this big gap where the wood's warped on the low tunnel that's got the peppers in it. So I need to get that closed up. It's fine at the moment, actually it's quite good at the moment, because it just gets that little bit of breeze blowing through there, keeps them slightly cooler, but it needs to be closed up for a frosty night. I've just taken the shade cloth off my winter carrots, and they've germinated really nicely. So I shall have the carrot fly net on here soon, as soon as I get this batch of spinach harvested and that part of the bed planted. Freed up some shade cloth to cover the parsnips, which have not germinated yet. So the next job is to get this old spinach harvested and these overwintered beetroot. I'm not going to overwinter beetroot anymore. This experiment has not worked. Somebody was asking me which experiments worked and which didn't over the years, and I've got to say almost everything works, and if it doesn't I'll tell you about it. This one didn't, which is overwintering beetroot. I was always dubious about it, but more veg I think it is. They sent me, I subscribed to their email newsletter, and they said, oh yeah, plant your overwintering beetroot. So I did, bought some, but it's all gone to seed. So this was not really a good idea. I'm not going to do it again. I'm just going to do what I always do, which is plant bolt hardy, sow bolt hardy in February under cover, and plant it out in March in these coal frames, and yeah, get a nice early crop that way. But I'm not sure. There probably will be a little bit of beetroot here. Maybe it'll be okay for pickling or something like that. We'll have a look. So that's the beetroot bed out. I should mention now we've been harvesting it for leaves, so it's not all gone totally to waste. This was last year and will be again the New Zealand spinach bed, and you can see there's a lot of self-seeded New Zealand spinach in here, but this bed needs reconditioning, so all these little seedlings have to come out. I did transplant some of these seedlings not long ago, about 6 weeks ago, into module trays. That's what I'll be planting back in here now. So I'm weeding out most of this bed, but these plants look particularly good just here, so I'm going to prick some of these out into these trays. So actually 12 plants is more than enough to plant a square metre bed like this. I normally plant 9 plants, but it's interesting that even quite big seedlings like this one, they have almost no root system on them. Quite deep, but no side roots or whatever you call them. Yeah, and I noticed this, when I was planting some out the other day, that there's almost nothing there. Very strange. Spinach bed. I just twist these plants out, they come out so easily. They've not got much of a root system on them. And this is another bed that will have self-seeded, but it's not warm enough yet for the seeds to germinate. So this was golden purslane, it will be golden purslane again. There's not many things that I grow that self-seed, just the New Zealand spinach and the golden purslane, so they always go back into the same beds. So all my beds are basically reconditioned roughly the same way. So they get about between 1 and 2 inches of water. Then they get seaweed meal, Marshall's Organic Extra, and chicken manure pellets in different proportions depending on the bed, but almost always a mix of those 3. And the amount they get kind of depends on the previous crop, how healthy the crops have looked, etc, etc. So it's hard to say exactly, but roughly you might say 1 handful of seaweed meal and 1 handful of a mix of the chicken manure pellets and the Marshall's Organic Extra, and then another watering can just to wash that in, and then a 40-litre bag of spent mushroom compost on top to act as a mulch. So these are the New Zealand spinach plants that I'm planting. As you can see, they've got a little bit scorched, but they grow into massive plants, so a few scorched leaves doesn't matter. So I generally put 9 plants in a square metre. This will feed a family of 4. It's a very prolific plant, fairly drought tolerant, but that doesn't mean you don't have to water it. It still needs watering. Yeah, it's a great plant. So much better than true spinach in summer. Well, basically from June through to the end of September, really. And since it's very windy, with cold nights, with a frost threatening, I just popped a cold frame lid on for now. They're all pretty happy in there. So I'm back in the polytunnel now, and I'm clearing but not planting because of the frost this bed, which will be peppers, and it was spinach, and then I interplanted cauliflower into it, and this is what's left of the spinach. I've just taken the cauliflowers out, and I've got to say this has not been the best bed for spinach. It was Medania. It's not my favourite spinach. I much prefer red kitten, and it didn't really survive very well with these light levels. I mean, it lived, and it gave us a few leaves, but it just didn't keep on giving. So next year we're switching to red kitten, and we're doing it in this bed, which gets a lot more sun. Right, so that's another bed cleared and mulched. So I'll just finish off talking about what I'm going to do when the frost threatens. All these spare tomatoes and peppers are coming home. There's enough peppers and tomatoes here to replant everything that I planted already. And that's not just because I go excessively on spares, because I do, but it's actually just because I did a test of the grow lights, and I did 3 different batches of tomatoes and 2 different batches of peppers to compare and contrast. So I've actually got 3 times as many tomatoes and twice as many peppers as I need. I'm just going to give those away, but it means that I've got plenty of spares. Courgettes and things like that, they just have fleece stroked over the top of them. Runner beans and French beans in the polytunnel, they'll have fleece wrapped around them. I've taken the climbing clips strings off the centre cut climbing squash, so that'll just have fleece stroked over the top, as will the sweet corn. All the peppers in here and the tomatoes in here, they'll just have fleece strokes over the top of them, so they should be fine. All my squashes, which are due to be planted out in June, they'll just go home. Outside, anything remotely tender is still under cover here, so these things like the French beans, I'll probably just pop a bit of fleece over the top of those and close this cover. Close this cover on the early sweet corn and close this cover on the peppers. It's kind of ironic, having just talked about all those frost protection activities, but I actually had to put the mylar blanket up in the roof of the polytunnel because, having just planted all this stuff out here, it's just way too hot for it at the moment. You can see it sagging a little bit anyway, so yeah, they really benefit from this blanket on really sunny days, even at this time of year. Temperature in here underneath the blanket is 75 degrees, so down there on the ground it's probably more like 80, which is just about perfect. My potatoes are effectively finished now, i.e. they're ready, so I don't really care whether they get frosted or not. Like this quick video. My name's Steve, this is the Seaside Allotment, and I'll see you soon.